I hope you're beginning to see a pattern forming here. To use something in your imaginary scenes, first you just need to understand it. And then there's the aspect of outside reference. So for materials, we're going to be taking the exact same approach, but relying even more heavily on photo reference. So there are three major areas that I could talk about for this subject. The first is a purely technical one, how to observe and paint materials using Photoshop, just how to use a brush. If you want to know about that, make sure to check out Creating Realistic Surfaces in the Control Paint store. The second thing I could talk about would be the meaning of materials. And we'll talk a little bit about that here. But that is definitely discussed more in Design Basics, which you can also find in the Control Paint store. Instead, what I want to focus on is how to learn from reference materials, learn about those objects, and then recall that knowledge into your own scenes. Again, going from observation to imagination. So first, let's talk a little bit about the meaning of materials. You see, there's a reason why we're drawn to certain products and not others. It's just like fashion. I might be drawn to a specific style because of what it says about me, and you might like a different style because that's how you identify. Well, the construction materials that an industrial designer chooses to use in a product are no different. An iPhone is made out of glass and aluminum, which gives it an air of elegance. You don't need to know anything about the phone, but you can just guess that it's pretty expensive. On the other hand, there are phones which are designed to be durable. Now, these aren't just to be functionally durable. These are designed in a way to broadcast. They are durable, and you know it just by looking at them. So this phone, with all of its very obvious exposed fasteners and visible seams, is tapping into a cultural understanding. It's speaking a silent language that we all know how to interpret. This is called design language, and material choice has a lot to do with it. So if the first step is the proper choice of material, then the next question becomes, well, how can you possibly learn and remember how to paint each and every one? For me, it comes down to simplification. In the same way that I group lights into a variety of categories, I like to group materials into a set of categories and learn the simple rules of thumb for each. So we'll start with matte finish materials. In general, these are the lowest contrast and have a smoother transition from light to dark. They do not have a glossy highlight. Glossy materials are similar to matte finish, except they have the addition of specularity, and that means a bright, visible highlight. It's going to be the highest value in the entire material, and that generally sort of draws the eye and creates high contrast. The tightness of this glossy highlight is going to tell you a bit about the material. If it's super smooth and shiny, it's going to have a very sharp highlight. If the material is a little more scuffed, then you'll see that this highlight is broken up a bit, and it's a bit more of a diffused highlight. If you continue to scuff a material like this, it eventually loses its shine completely, and then it becomes a matte finish object. The most extreme example of a reflective material is chrome, because chrome essentially doesn't have natural color. Instead, it's primarily accepting colors that are reflected from the surrounding environment. But chrome isn't the only reflective surface. Many materials have some amount of reflectivity to them, and this reflectivity is often most visible when seen from a steep angle. So let's look at car paint. This is a great example of a reflective material. If I look at car paint, I can say that this is orange, and it is a very brilliant orange when I look directly at it. But then as the form begins to turn in space, when I see the edge of it at the steepest angle, it becomes very reflective. Here it's not so much orange, but it's orange mixed with the reflected color of the sky. So that means that this is a reflective material, but that you see that effect happening more often when it's seen at a steep angle. So here we've got some basic categories: matte finish, glossy, and glossy with reflective qualities. And the question then becomes a practical one. When I want to paint something from my imagination, how do I do it? Well, let's say I want to make something that has a matte finish panel on it, but maybe I also want some black shiny metal hardware on it. So this may be an imaginary subject. I'm inventing some sort of product. But the materials that I'm going to build this with are real-world materials. So now I'm going to begin gathering reference. The trick with materials that you don't have lying around your house is that they're going to react to the light differently in different situations. Just like car paint. Remember how it's a little more reflective around the edges? Well, that might be hard to learn from a single photo. If you actually go walk around in a parking lot and you carefully look at what the light is doing, you're just going to learn more information about that material. But let's be practical here. We are artists working with deadlines and we're sitting at computers. So we're going to need a solution that can be found on the internet. And I like to gather a variety of reference from a variety of different angles and lighting conditions. That way I can lay them all out and look for common ground. I can look for patterns. So even though each of these are different from one another, the similarities in the way the highlight looks or in the overall value arrangement is going to tell me about how this material works in general. Now this is good. This is when I can begin to paint from what I know. So I've got two sources of information. The first is my reference sheet, and this is going to give me specific examples. And then I bring in my general knowledge categories, my rules of thumb. I know that this is a slightly reflective, glossy material. And that means that I know how it works in general, and that the reference is going to help me get more specific. All right, armed with this information, I'm ready to paint. And once again, this is great news. Instead of some magical force that I have to spend decades learning how to paint every material, here I'm just using a set of repeatable steps. I may have never painted this particular black metal before, but I'm approaching it with a formulaic process. Sure, if I were to paint a lot of sci-fi scenes, I might use certain references less and less because I'll just get more practice with those materials and I'll begin to know them by heart. But if I've got a procedure in place whenever I need to paint a material that I don't know by memory, it's a lot less scary. And at the risk of beating a dead horse, I think this is a really important takeaway. It's learning to break away from simply copying and to paint what you know. And it's about having that repeatable system in place so when some unexpected subject matter does happen, you have a way to break it down into simple pieces. Because art is all about tackling new challenges and generally not limiting yourself to familiar territory. So your ability to break these challenges into manageable chunks is really essential to your long-term success in your career.